video views its subject matter under a lens of scrutiny. What this means is that I will be engaging in criticism. If you would prefer to steer clear of the negativity, there are always other videos on my channel which you are at your liberty to browse. Otherwise, enjoy the show. And just a reminder, these videos are made possible by my supporters on this platform, so if you do want to support me, be sure to hit that big, beautiful subscribe button. And be sure to check out the Patreon link in the description below. The power plant battle. The sort of final battle part 1 of The Amazing Spider-Man 2. The big climactic action set piece of the film. While the action sequences in The Amazing Spider-Man 1 were a little more understated and grounded than the original Sam Raimi trilogy, in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Mark Webb and the VFX department and everybody involved went full throttle to deliver an action sequence that would be more thrilling than any before it. And it really must be said, this scene is bloody exhilarating. But if I'm being completely honest, I have never thought this worked. I love this scene, but I don't think it works at all. And this is an opinion that I've voiced, I think, a couple of times when it's kind of come up on Twitter, and I've been royally ratioed for. And to be honest, I don't think people actually genuinely get what I mean when I say this, even though I've kind of explained it until I've been as blue in the face as Electro. But I'm kind of just making this video as the definitive, this is why I don't think the scene works. But of course, as always, if you do think the scene works, then all power to you. Get power because Electro's fuck off. So basically, premise of this scene, big power outage in New York. Electro is destroying the power plant and harnessing energy from it. And because the power is completely down, there are 2 aeroplanes that are flying blind heading towards each other. So it's a race against the clock to defeat Electro. First things first, the narrative device of the race against the clock. Once again, in the theme that The Amazing Spider-Man 2 has throughout, everyone is working against the clock at all times in this film. Well, apart from the whole Richard Parker stuff, but otherwise, everything in this film, there's always some kind of ticking clock going on. And Spider-Man is working against the clock to stop these planes from colliding. That's not the only clock as well that he's working against. There's also the life support systems at the hospital that Aunt May works at, and we're kind of shown just how much is at stake here with the power off. The problem is that Peter Parker acknowledges absolutely none of it. At no point does the film ever register that Peter Parker has any awareness of what's at stake. He has no idea that those planes are heading towards each other. The idea of the entire city being at stake, so Spider-Man's working against the clock to save Electro, is great, but Peter doesn't seem to really even know that he's working against the clock. And if he does, it's never really communicated to the audience, so this kind of hurts the immersion of it. It is just a effectively non-diegetic clock as far as this action sequence is concerned. I've also heard people talk about how there would never be a scenario where 2 planes are just hurtled towards each other like that, just because the navigation is down, but I'm no pilot, I don't know 100% how that works. But yeah, having the actual battle itself be so disconnected from the actual stakes, not a great way of doing that. But to be fair, people have already acknowledged that, and the gripes I talked about on my Twitter that I got ratioed for, these were more to do with the presentation of the scene. Now, I want to get one thing out of the way first. I do not think that the CGI in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is bad. The actual fidelity of these CGI models and like the amount of detail that's in there, even down to like the rippling of Spider-Man's costume, is some of the best that we've had in any Spider-Man movie, heck, maybe even a superhero movie in general. My issue is kind of how it's utilized in this film. But it's not just that. Superhero films have CGI all the time, and in many cases a lot worse than this. It is the fact that when I am watching the power plant battle of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, it feels like a quick-time event in a video game. And I'm not going to be one of those scoffy, oh, it's like a PS2 game graphics kind of guys. No. This looks like, at worst, PS5 level. Heck, even beyond that. Like, the visuals are, like, as far as fidelity goes, sublime. It's how it's all brought together. This is naturally going to be a pretty CGI-heavy fight. We've got Electro, a very CGI-heavy guy with lots of electric beams and stuff, going up against Spider-Man, a very kinetic character that does a lot of feats that no ordinary human can do. And in some cases, it would be a complete safety hazard to use stuntmen, so they use CGI. And yeah, the CGI model is up to par. But even if they had stuntmen actually doing this that could actually spin webs out of their wrists, this would still look phony as fuck. This fight is utterly overproduced. But there is no one thing I'm pinpointing here when I say this looks like a video game. It's this big marriage of things that just do not work, or at least don't belong together. For starters, it's gotta be said, Mark Webb does an amazing job at directing character moments and landscapes and such. Fight scenes feel like boss battle arenas, even when they're not in, like, arenas. I don't think he proved to do a very good job at making use of the spaces in his action sequences. Particularly in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, everything feels like the location is just a backdrop and not actually a part of the fight that actually gets utilized properly. And anytime it does get utilized, it feels very situational. For example, the Times Square battle in the midway point of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, that could have just been one strip of land with a bunch of people cheering Spidey on, and that's it. In fact, that literally is the scene. We don't see Spider-Man jumping onto any walls or clinging to anything or making much use of his environment at all. It's just Electro on one end, Spider-Man on another end, he's throwing webs at that guy, and Electro's throwing electricity at that guy, and there's just a bunch of people clapping. But with the Times Square showdown, we at least had something that resembled a real-life location. Moving into the power plant battle, we've got a very fantastical location with these giant metal beams with these neon lights all over them, and it looks like fucking Stardust Speedway from Sonic Generations. It would be one thing to have an all-CGI Spider-Man versus an all-CGI Electro battling it out. It's another thing entirely to have them doing it in a place that doesn't feel tangible. This also isn't helped by the lighting either. Everything looks really overlit. It's supposed to be nighttime, and I get that these big sort of Tesla coil looking things are bearing some light down, but it doesn't look like the sort of the harsh light you would expect from it. It just looks like there's giant spotlights all over the place. And like a lot of them have this very blue tint to them, which I get it's nighttime and everything, and he's fighting against Electro, but there is such a thing as too much blue. And when it comes to like a bright electrical blue, you need to use that kind of sparingly, because it will always look kind of artificial on film. Here we've got a blue electric man under blue lighting in an environment that's very reflective of all of the blues in it with blue color grading, while blue electricity shoots out of this guy and there's flourishes everywhere. It's too much fucking blue. It doesn't look real. You could have CGI that is 10 times worse, but if it weren't for all this blue, it would look 10 times more realistic. Then there is the portrayal of Electro's power. Again, it's one thing that is blue, and I'm not gonna deny that this must have taken a lot of work to get the electricity to this point, and there's definitely some beauty in it, but there's so much of it on screen in this scene. Even down to just the way Electro moves around projecting after images with these blue flurries around it. It's amazing. It's so well done. But in this scene, like, that combined with everything else that's going on here, it doesn't look real. Spider-Man No Way Home definitely did a lot better, and this is more of like a retrospective criticism, but like Spider-Man No Way Home gave him white lightning and was a lot more sparing with it and a lot less kind of mystical with it, and it came out looking a lot more convincing than these flourishes of blue left, right, and center all over the screen. It feels like Spider-Man's just jumped into the iTunes visualizer from the mid-2000s. And then it's like, take all this and combine it with impossible camera movements. Now, I'm not saying that filmmakers should avoid doing nigh on impossible camera movements to create thrilling action sequences. It's just when you have that married with all this, the camera's moving so fast, everything on screen is moving, again, so very fast. Particularly in the second half of this fight, it just adds to there is so much here that you could never capture on a camera, which adds to the breaking of the immersion. And the other problem is they combine it. There's a combination of pretty steady basic static shots with these really fast moving scrolling shots, and it's almost like it draws this big fat ring around everything that's practical and everything that's CGI. And I get it, CGI is an accepted parts of movies and stuff, but the best kind of CGI is the stuff you don't notice, when it blends seamlessly with the film. Then combine this, and it really does look like the fucking Stardust Speedway fight from Sonic Generations. In fact, less realistic. But then take all of that and combine it with this synth music. None of it feels real. It really does feel like a video game. And the near constant switches to slow motion where you can almost imagine those button prompts coming up. It's like they were constantly introducing new things to try and up the ante in this fight, but every new thing they did broke the immersion. Now, I'm going to also say this. Pretty much every one of these elements I really like. I like the electronic music. I like the use of slow motion to replicate splash pages. I like the intense laser light show look and colors, but all these things, they don't really go together. And in many ways, that's also like a summarization of like my views on The Amazing Spider-Man 2 as a movie on a whole. This stuff doesn't fit together. And this scene feels so out of place in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, a film that generally uses a lot of pretty steady camera shots and generally looks pretty realistic. A lot of the stuff in that film looks like it could have been captured in camera. Specifically, like if you look at even action sequences, the first Rhino chase, that all like, okay, there's a lot of goofy moments where it's like there's obvious filmmaking and wires on people and stuff, but it at least looks like it was shot within the camera. This looks like it's from a completely different film. It looks like it's from a completely different director. It feels like this scene could have been taken more likely from like Into the Spider-Verse than The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And that's also where I'm going with this, is like if the entire film were shot like this, using these impossible camera angles and using, you know, a lot of CGI and had this very kinetic style to it, this would totally work, and it would also make a totally awesome film. I would love to see that, just a very kinetic Spider-Man film, just like this final action sequence here. But one of the things I really noticed with Mark Webb's filming style, like throughout The Amazing Spider-Man 1 and most of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, he keeps it pretty simple with the camera work. The camera's not always moving around really fast and stuff. And like these action sequences aren't always doing these big wide shots. They're generally quite intimately filmed, which is why this scene just doesn't work. It stands out like a sore thumb. Again, I'm not saying it's bad. I pretty much like all of the stuff that this scene is comprised of, aside from the narrative stuff I mentioned. But it just doesn't work within The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Do you guys get it now? It's the marriage of things. I'm not saying the CGI is bad. I'm not saying Mark Webb's even a bad director. I have criticisms of him, sure. Like, I feel like he doesn't use space very well in the action sequences. But it's like, this almost kind of feels like, you know, Sony just went to, like, their CGI house and their image works and we're just like, yeah, you make this action sequence. Now, I want to point out a little bit of potential hypocrisy here. Because you could easily make the case of, well, Pup, you like Spider-Man Far From Home and have said that the Mysterio Berlin scene is one of your favorite scenes, but all of that stuff looks pretty impossible to capture within a camera, right? And yeah, that scene is pretty obviously CGI in a lot of places. But my defense is that, like, in universe, this is all being projected by drones. None of it is real, even going down so far as for Peter to say, I know none of this is real. And I'll be honest, I also just think the scene's a bit more artistic than this, you know? Like, yeah, it's obvious a lot of this stuff is not filmed on camera, and some of the stuff that is clearly done on a green screen. But it definitely strikes me as a bit less overproduced than this Electro scene. I mean, because there's not so much ridiculous stuff going on screen at once at such a high speed. Instead, it's just very moment to moment, you know? So that's why that works for me. I'll explain that. There you go. There's your explanation. Again, this is not intended to invalidate anyone that does think this scene works. Like, whether you like it or not, whether you think it works on an objective level or not, that's completely up to you. Completely fair game equals pequals. I don't care, you know? Love what you want to love. That's a good thing. Life is way too shitty for us to not take joy in fiction. So don't let anyone put you down for loving The Amazing Spider-Man 2 or even just loving this scene. But that's why I personally don't think it works. So what do you guys think? If you enjoyed this video and you want to support more like it, be sure to hit that big, beautiful subscribe button. And of course, in the description below are links to different social media feeds, including the Patreon. If you're feeling extra generous, like the following people, who are JK Strife, Marcus Ward, Sirius the Skeptic, Biotinarts, Mr. SP, David 20 Covers, Sergio, John Comey, Shodin, George is Lost, Legendary Ray Ray, Cheesemaster769, Adam Myers, and Fayalan Schwarzenkraut. Thank you guys, you are the best of the best, but as for the rest of you, thank you so much for watching, guys, and have a great day.